been sitting here, I've assembled some books to show you, and I had all sorts of things going through my mind. But the first thing that I want to let everybody know is the following. Wildlife management is a very, very old profession. It has been around for hundreds of years, and we have a long history to look back onto it. In other words, if you are confronted today with a problem that seems to be novel, chances are it is an old one. And certainly the management of wolves and the dealing with wolves is very, very ancient. I'll give you a little example. For instance, try to find me a book that shows you how to differentiate dog tracks from wolf tracks. The first such was published 1,200 years ago by the Emperor Charlemagne, and he was spot on, absolutely correct. During the medieval times, foresters performed miracles of wildlife management, and all this is recorded, but it's not on the computer, and you have to have a library card, basically, to get at it. So the first thing is to know is when I'm talking about wolf management, I'm falling back onto hundreds and hundreds of years of history. Well, here. First published in 1717, an absolutely excellent account of wolf biology. And the only publication that I can think of that shows you how to differentiate female from male tracks, or the track of a healthy wolf as opposed to a wolf who's suffering from who is sick as such. In those days, tracking was everything, and they had to understand it very, very, very well. The point of the matter is, what I'm talking about falls at times on rather ancient wisdoms. Now, the second thing that I wanted to get into is rather quickly, is what is happening when we don't find wildlife. My colleagues and I have been discussing this, and we find, for instance, in vast areas of Siberia, but also in Alaska, and nowadays in Canada, areas that are virtually wildlife deserts. And we call them predator pits. The way they are created is, I'll be very quick about it, it begins with wolves. The wolves take down the wildlife. Once the wildlife is taken down, grizzly bears take over. And the grizzly bear, by virtue of the large amount of vegetation that is unfed on and so on and so forth, does very, very well. And when the calving season comes around, grizzly bears begin to systematically hunt down the young, the fawns, the calves, and so on and so forth. And they do an extremely good job of it. We know that because in Alaska, some very excellent research has been done by instrumenting bears with cameras. And so they were able to record in great detail what each bear was doing each day. And so we know that the bears varied between, in about a month's time or so, they ate between 50 fawns for the champion, and the one that least had 7 as such. In other words, the grizzly bears take down a very, very large amount of ungulates. And the result of that is the wildlife pit or the wildlife desert. And you can see that, for instance, in some of the videos that are being shown of hunting in Siberia, or hunting in the Yukon for that matter, by Jim Shockley, where the party goes for days on days on days through absolutely wonderful habitat, and there is nothing to be seen. And then all of a sudden they do find a few animals, very few animals, usually some rather good ones, and they're very happy they return from a successful hunt. Now, predator pits are nothing new. The famous Chadwick ram was taken in a predator pit in the Prophet River in Musper region in 1936. And a few years later, 1937, a German hunting party led by Lothar Graf Höhnsbreck was in that country, and his descriptions are excellent. And it also turns out that this was a predator pit at that time. Now, I was very much taken when I was reading some of the writings of my Siberian colleagues, because they pointed to the modern tundra and taiga as wildlife deserts. And to me, this was rather interesting, because as a young man, I was in those so-called wildlife deserts, and they were everything but wildlife desert. In other words, the very, very same plant communities that in Siberia are being labeled as wildlife deserts, I saw in the Yukon Territory and in northern British Columbia as wildlife heavens, literally. To give you just simply sort of crass differences, in most of the films that you see of hunting in Siberia or the Yukon, it takes days and days and days before they see any wildlife. On the first day that I went into the Spasizi in 1961, I ran into a group of stones ramp. There were 20 of them. And I studied that group for 8 weeks every day. And the next valley over, there were 15. On September 1961, my wife and I, newlyweds, we went at the southern end of Goldfish Lake. We went onto the Spasizi Plateau, and what we saw was a gathering of the caribou bulls, the Osborne caribou bulls. This is what we saw in front of us was a milling group of caribou bulls, about 200 yards across, and we saw a moving wall of antlers. This phenomenon is called the gathering of the bulls, and it occurs once in a while in barren ground caribou. But it can only be found when caribou are in fact very, very common. And a couple of years ago, a colleague of mine rode through the same countryside for 3 weeks on end and didn't see a single head of big game, but he did see the shed antlers. And some 20 years before that, some of my students through that countryside, after it became a provincial park, they wanted to study caribou. They found very few caribou, but they found a pack of wolves that numbered 43. Well, it tells you something. So what we have is, in the development of a predator pit, we have, as I said, free for all by wolves, an uncontrolled wolf population. They take over entirely. Then grizzly bears take over. They keep the wildlife ungulate populations very, very, very low. And at the same time, of course, wolves are now also declining in numbers severely. So there are very few wolves in a predator pit situation. If you continue working along that line and try to find out more about it, you will discover that in Alaska, this phenomenon has been well recognized, but they don't call it predator pit. They call it, and I have it right here, the low density dynamic equilibrium. We would never think that you would associate that with predation. The low density dynamic equilibrium. And what that means in Alaskan terms is that they are very well aware of the predator pit phenomenon. They allow it to exist as long as they don't need the wildlife. If they need wildlife, they go into an area, they do predator control, and they begin to then get the benefit of that control. Just to give you a little insight about how the quantities work in this regard. In Yellowstone Park, we've had introduction of wolves, as you're well aware, and we've had some good studies done. It turns out that per wolf, per year, 22 elk are being killed. In other words, for every living wolf, there are 22 dead elk. And under poor circumstances, it's only 16. That's when the wolves leave the countryside because it's too difficult to hunt. Let's turn this around for a moment. Imagine that you're standing in front of your house on your lawn and there are 22 elk in front of you. That's the number of elk that remain alive if you take out one wolf. In other words, what we do know historically is it doesn't take very much wolf control and you get your wildlife back again. And in fact, it may sound so odd, But when the very first modern people came to Europe 40,000 years ago, all of a sudden we find that their population density is 10 to 15 times that of the preceding Neanderthals. Well, how could this possibly happen in the same country by people eating the same food, killing the same wildlife, and one has a population density 15 times greater than the other? Well, the answer is that they engaged in predator control, and Neanderthal did not. And we know that they engage in predator control because the wolves throughout Europe for thousands and thousands of years were in a genetic bottleneck. And a genetic bottleneck means that the numbers of wolves are very, very low. And the second thing that happens, and I saw that myself as a young man in the Spazizi, when you have a severe decline in wolves and you have a very, very great rebound of wildlife, the wolves, of course, have a large amount of food and they grow into giants. And that's exactly what happened in Europe in the Upper Paleolithic. The wolves were considerably larger than those that are around today practically, and much, much larger than the wolves that were around during Neanderthal times. So when I was in the Spazizi, the first thing that I saw was wolves that were giants. The first wolf that I killed was as big as any whitetail buck. It was a huge animal. And that is exactly what you get when you have a wildlife paradise within which wolves are still existing. Now, how did we get to the high abundance of wildlife in the past? Let's go back into the last century, into the first half of the last century. In the first half of the last century, we had roughly 60,000 trappers throughout northern Canada. 60,000 trappers. And these trappers used as their means of transportation the dog sled. Now, dog sleds and wolves don't get along very well. So it was very important for them to exercise wolf control in order to travel safely and securely. And secondly, they were very much aware and pained by the fact that if wolves were at all common, they would follow their trap lines and destroy the fur. Now, these men were desperately poor. In a winter, they might get $300 to $500. In fact, one source, which was a German trapper who wrote 2 books about it, his first winter he managed to clean $76 worth. The other factor that affected them was that when wolves come into a countryside, the wildlife tends to leave, and it tends to leave in a panic and not return for several days or maybe several weeks. And that affected trappers because they lived from the wildlife. So they exercised wolf control during that time. Now, in addition to that, the government, federal government, became quite concerned about the spread of hydatid disease, which is an awful disease, to say the very least, and it is contained by wolves. It's the dog tapeworm and the eggs of the dog tapeworm, which are passed from the feces and which tend to infect ungulates. And the ungulates develop cysts in the lungs and livers and brain. And when these are eaten by stray dogs, they pass again the eggs of the tapeworm, and the trappers were getting infected. And I know when I was a young student, we were being shown pictures from the operating theater of the General Hospital in Vancouver. And it's an awful sight to behold. At any rate, the net result was that there was additional wolf control by virtue of throwing poisoned horse meat from aircraft in strategic localities. So in addition to the trappers, to the poisoning, to the control exercised by native people, by residents, by hunters, and so on and so forth, you had therefore a severe reduction in wolves. Now let's say the reduction was by half. We have today about 60,000 wolves. Let's say that 100 years ago, we had about 30,000 wolves. And that means that, that for every wolf, you had 2 trappers. And wolves roam over enormous areas, and they're very, very smart animals. They learn in a different way than dogs. They learn by observation, and they become quite shy. The net result was that we had a low wolf population, but a complete wolf population, that we had an abundance of wildlife, and that we had no instances of wolves attacking people. And where wolves came and entered into ranch country, they were being controlled by predator control officers. This was, in many regards, an ideal situation, because under these situations, the wolf retained its genetic integrity as a wolf. Because one of the appalling things that is happening in the States right now and in Europe is that with the reintroduction of wolves into settled landscapes, the wolves are beginning to hybridize. And with the hybridization of the wolf, you're losing the wolf. So these attempts by environmentalists to introduce wolves into our countryside actually lead to the extinction of the wolf. And here on Vancouver Island, where I have had contact with wolves, the majority of wolves show dog symptoms. So one way to exterminate wolves as a species is to do exactly what we're doing right now, particularly in the United States, that is not only protect, but to spread wolves into settled landscapes, or in Europe. And they will then hybridize in the United States with coyotes and wolves to get the coy wolf. And in Europe, you get the golden jackal hybridizing with wolf, and the dog, of course. So this is in progress at the present time. The wolf is and should be a wilderness animal. And it should always be away from the settled landscapes. And that's a very, very important lesson to learn. So what we had up to about 1960, 65, 64, a situation where the trapping itself was a very important aspect, and there were no ski-doos at that time. There were no snowmobiles at that time. But the introduction of the snowmobile now relieved the trapper of the necessity of really going after wolves. So the snowmobile helps the survival of wolves. And then there is another factor, which operated particularly in the Spatsizi in the 1950s and 60s, where I did my studies on stone sheep and mountain goats. And that is the following. The outfitters in those days used horses for transportation. And horses were expensive and difficult to get into the countryside, particularly to overwinter. And so in order to overwinter, there were people hired that looked after them, and that also practiced, of course, wolf control. So in the Spatsizi, there were natives, which themselves were traveling by dog team. So they themselves had reason to control wolves. The net result was in the Spatsizi, because of these two factors, control of wolves because of horses, controls of wolves because of dog sled, you had a wildlife paradise, an unbelievable wildlife paradise. When we all thought falsely that this was natural. We tried very, very hard to get this area set aside, and we succeeded. The biggest ecological reserve in British Columbia is my study area of stone sheep in the Spatsizi. And we managed to get, as you are aware, a provincial park out of it. But the moment the philosophy took over, that you leave everything alone because it is natural, this slowly but surely began the process of the predator pit, which is now complete pretty well. In other words, you get a wildlife desert out of it. Now, you wonder what happened in earlier times. In earlier times, under natural conditions, before human beings became a potent source on this earth, wolves were very rare. You do find them in the fossil record, but not very many. And we have a pretty good idea why they were rare. As long as they were living together with large cats and predaceous bears, wolves were very rare. Today, if you go to the Manchuria, wherever there are tigers, there are few, if any, wolves. In fact, the residents will tell you when they had lots of tigers, there were no wolves at all. Yeah. And the residents like the tiger because as long as the tiger is present, there's wildlife available. But when the tiger is absent, the wolves take over and you have the wildlife. If you go to India, where there are tigers, lions, leopards than the wolves. But where there are snow leopards, the wolves are endangered. Well, we have a somewhat parallel situation in Africa, and that is that there's an antagonism between the hunting dogs and the lions. Lions systematically hunt hunting dogs. So what was natural in former times was a very low abundance of wolves. But there was an abundance of other predators, and there was a rather large abundance of all of wildlife as such. In other words, the wolf is an extremely efficient predator. And the reason it is so efficient today is because it has been released from its natural enemies. And when you let wolves go in the countryside, that's not natural. That's very unnatural. Under natural conditions, wolves didn't do this. Now, I'd like to point out a few things that might be helpful in the future. Beside me, I have a little stack of books. And I'll tell you a few things about them because you will not find these on the internet. The internet, for all its glory, also has its downside. You do have trolls on the internet that systematically remove information. And this has happened to me. This has been removed by trolls from the internet right now. This is a paper, as you can see, I'm the chief author here, on chronic wasting disease. And it's a planning document. And it has not found favor with some people, and so it has been taken off the internet. Hackers have done that. Here is a book that I hope you'll be able to get, but it's difficult to get nowadays. This was written by Will Graves. Will Graves was a senior intelligence officer with the United States Diplomatic Corps. He was stationed in Moscow, Russia, and as an avid hunter and rifleman, he became interested in talking with the guards outside the US Embassy. These guards were mainly kids, young men from Siberia. And what they told him about wolves was so different from what he was aware of in the United States and Canada, etc., that he became interested and began to systematically look into this matter. Will Graves then made friends with Russian scientists. He made friends with Russian editors. For some reason, he was able to travel, and he met people that had been taken down by wolves and injured and so on and so forth. And he kept a record of it, and he wrote eventually a book about it. Now, this book arrived on my desk. This book manuscript arrived on my desk, and he was very frustrated. He had tried a large number of publishers, but they wouldn't publish that book. And I read it, and in my judgment, it was too long, it was too redundant. And I said to him, look, if you allow me to edit this book, I think I will be able to get it published in Canada for you. I had some connections at that time to academic publishing, and that is exactly what happened. I edited that book. I wrote the introduction to it. I sweated blood over it, but it came out, and wolves in Russia, we couldn't give it away when it was first published. Today, you can hardly afford a second-hand copy, it's so expensive. And what happened was that it was translated at once in Finland into this book. And the Finns not only translated Will Graves' book, they also produced a second edition of it where they added more information from Russia to it. Now, one Finnish colleague of mine decided to then work together with Will Graves on another book, and this is The Grey Wolf Revealed, a superlative book, absolute superlative, one of the best books on wolves that there is. So that's something that you may want to get for yourself. And then there is one here that came out here, The Real Wolf, also with Will Graves as a co-author, Ted Lyons, highly recommended. In other words, we do have quite a bit of information available. Now, just a little reflection of what happened around here. 350 yards from where I'm sitting here. In 17th of March, 2017, 5 wolves attacked my next door neighbor. He fortunately had a big branch from a red cedar lying in front of him, and he began to whack the wolves, and his wife ran across the meadows towards my house shouting, "Well, well, John, wolves, get gun." And I grabbed hold of my rifle. I was then in my morning gown, and I charged out, and I came just a little bit too late. The wolves, John had beaten back the wolves quite successfully, and he was out of breath, and he said, if any of the wolves had carries, I would have seen them. These wolves hadn't learned very much out of that engagement, incidentally, because the next day, when he was a dairy farmer, and the couple went out again, but this time, the next day, John carried a rifle, and the wolves attacked again 200 yards beyond that, and he shot one. The biggest, it weighed 75 pounds, I know, because I weighed it. Now, we had about a mile from where I'm speaking here, we've killed a total of 17 wolves. This was done by hunters, by landowners, by game wardens, predator control officers, and so on and so forth, which came here. And we had here quite some interesting experiences, which I began to share with my colleagues that were raising wolves, like Professor Erich Klinghammer, who had a wolf park in Battleground, Indiana, and had it for many years. They've published wonderful material about it. So, or Professor Harry Frank and his wife. So I was in close contact with them, and we made observations here. And one of the observations that we made is how wolves slowly progress targeting people, because that was quite clear what they were doing. We didn't allow them to complete that because we killed them, of course. We wouldn't allow them to attack. But attacks did take place not very far from here on Vargas Island, where 2 wolves became tame, and eventually they took down a man at night, injured him severely. 80 stitches were required to sew up his wounds. I wrote my observations down, and I said what I observed was sort of a escalation by wolves, where they slowly but surely get closer and closer and closer. And it turns out that 2 colleagues in California had found exactly the same thing with coyotes. My system had 7 steps, their system has 6 steps. We laughed our heads off when we met. It was so identical. In other words, the big wolf and the little wolf used exactly the same procedure to get acquainted with humans as prey and target them. So this has been a little addition that we have. Furthermore, I was invited by the family of Kenton Carnegie to investigate his death by wolves in Saskatchewan. Now, I told you that the way that wolves were kept from human beings was by their experience with hostile human beings for decades on end. And wolves learn very, very, very well. So we had a situation where, yes, there were wolves attacking people in your Russia, occasionally Siberia, but not in America. You see, this was the puzzle that we had to solve, and we eventually solved it. The puzzle was that there were 60,000 trappers and 30,000 wolves, and the experience that these 30,000 wolves had with human beings kept them away from human beings. Now that changed in Saskatchewan when the government decided to forbid the hunting of wolves, or the trapping of wolves, the hunting of wolves. The only people that could kill wolves were trappers with a trap line, with a licensed trap line. So what happened was that at a mining camp in northern Saskatchewan, wolves were being fed by the garbage pit. Every day when the garbage was being brought from the kitchen to the pit, the wolves ran along the trucks, the garbage truck, and they would rip open the bags and so on and so forth, and there's nothing you could do about it. Kenton Carnegie was a very, very bright student. He was studying geology and engineering geology, and he was an environmentalist. He was a vegetarian, and he had strong beliefs along the line. And what happened was that he was quite interested that there were some wolves available. He wanted to photograph some of them. And 4 days before he was killed, 2 wolves confronted 2 people from that camp. They were a pilot, and the other one was a engineer. And the 2 men, fortunately, got out of the situation because they were at the edge of the runway. At the end of the runway was an old derelict plane, which they wanted to observe. They managed to pull out of the bog some dead little trees and smashed them against the wolves, and the wolves backed off, and they photographed themselves with the wolves. And they showed these photographs in camp, and one senior man said they were very lucky that they got away with their lives at that time. And Kenton Carnegie heard that, we know that much. Then he went out in the afternoon, in one afternoon, and wanted to go to the lake, and he didn't come back again. Oh. Then the search was initiated, his body was found. 2 people did the major investigation. They were the constable, who was a native American, and the coroner, a lady coroner from the next little town, who was also Native American. They did an outstanding job tracking and seeing that. And so this is available, and I have recorded this and I've published this with the Boone Crockett Club. So the natural result was that when the news came out that this man had been killed by wolves, there was a great denial by the environmentalists. They said there was a black bear that did it, which was rubbish. We have a good number of people that knew what they were doing, examining that site, and there were no black bear tracks there whatsoever. It was fresh snow on the ground anyway. But the important point about this one is the following. I tried to tell CBC and the National Review that one of the reasons that Kenton Carnegie was killed was the fact that Saskatchewan passed legislation that would prohibit the hunting of wolves. If Kenton Carnegie had landed in British Columbia, he would be alive and well today, because we do allow the hunting of wolves, in particular wolves around garbage dumps, or any wolves that acts strangely. In other words, any wolf with rabies will be very quickly eliminated. But that's not possible in Saskatchewan. The interesting thing is that CBC never reported that, or the National Post never reported that, but you should know about that. So I would also just simply like to say that the free spread of wolves is an unnatural event. In nature, this didn't occur. As long as we were not all powerful and dominated the earth, and certainly in North America, we haven't seen a natural landscape for the last 12,000 years. Before that, we had natural conditions, and wolves were very closely controlled by the natural enemies. And to just simply let wolves go free generates predator pits and destruction of wildlife. And we have to, if we treasure wildlife, if we treasure biodiversity, then you have to roll that back. And it doesn't take very much predator control to get wildlife back again, but it has to be done as such. And now, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'll gladly answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, everybody. So as we move into this phase of the Q&A, I'm going to go, please use your Q&A chat. What I would like to do as I roll through this is I'm going to try and turn on your video so that Val can speak with you directly, and that will promote you as a panelist so that you can chat. So Joe Munn, your question has been voted up and you are now coming online.
Joe Munn?
Joe Munn.
Hello, Joe.
We'll just
It hasn't
give
come
him a
yet. Your
minute.
image hasn't appeared yet.
Just waiting. I'm just sending him signals.
Okay.
And that's okay. Some people will know how to access this, some don't. So if we don't get a response from the question, then I will just ask the question. There he is. Hi, Joe.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I
We hear
can.
you.
Yeah, I was just wondering if black bears can play the same role in the predator pit as the grizzly bear does. You know, in some regions,
Yes, I
you know,
can.
that we don't have the high population of grizzly bears like the Yukon or
And by the way, you
elsewhere.
can go back to actual studies and literature in Alaska, and they demonstrate that. Where the grizzly bears are absent, the black bears take over. Yes,
Thank
so
you.
it's available. You're right on. Ewan? As you can see, I'm waiting for images to appear. Oh, hi.
Hi, Val. My name is Robin Unruh. You and I have spoken and emailed quite a few times.
Oh, yes.
Until the next
Nice to meet you.
until the next question comes up, I have a quick question,
Oh, please
or maybe
do.
not so quick, and it's involving inventory. Inventory, obviously, of our prey and inventory of predators. So in BC, we have very little knowledge of wildlife inventory. The most important reasons for this in BC is its size. Next would have to fall on funding or the lack of it. Is there any reasons we should be so terrible at knowing our inventory, as without it, we don't know how much is being lost, how much we had, and how much we're gaining or losing from year to year. So other than the expensive helicopter counts and camera grids, can ground counts be an affordable alternative to gain knowledge for inventory?
Well, of course, yes. If you do that systematically and do it year after year, your ground count, particularly in wintertime, can be enormously helpful. But you must remember the following. When it comes to spending money on wildlife, the cabinet is under the influence of the animal rights groups, basically. And this is what I'm hearing from those that are well informed. In other words, in order to do what you are proposing, it requires some money and some layout. And if they're being told, no, you don't have to do that, just quit hunting, let nature take its course, and you will be all right. That is the message which is coming out of the basically the environmental groups at the present time. And you should know also that the United States National Park Service has had on their website the statement that this idea of letting nature go has resulted in the decline of biodiversity in the national parks of the United States and an increase in the foreign species, invasive species. They are up now to the tune of 6,500 plus. Now, this is not nature conservation. This is nature destruction. What you need is exactly the obvious. You need a hands-on system of manipulating wildlife and plant populations so that you generate biodiversity, productivity, and beauty. And this can be done, we know that. But as I said, we have now that very large camp of people that are believing that nature knows best, therefore you don't do anything, and therefore there's no point in censusing wildlife because nature knows best. Sorry. I don't know how you break through that.
Thank you very much.
Evan Sogsted, would you please come up with your question?
Yes, Doctor. Parts of BC or most of BC has multiple layers of predators, from what, 4 or 5 large predators, then we get down into our smaller predators. So if we're to manage this, is focusing on wolves enough, or do we have to also focus on the bears, the coyotes, the cougars, the wolverines?
Well, the first thing that you've mentioned here is it's a very nice point that I failed to mention. You have, under some circumstances, a benefit of wolf abundance. And the benefit is that they get rid of the mesopredators, the little guys, yeah? And there are situations where native people welcomed wolves because in the absence of mesopredators, they had fish and they had waterfowl. Where you have a lot of mesopredators, you don't have that. And one of the best places to really read up on that, is by the observations of the first Spaniard who entered Florida in 1527. Cabeza de Vaca was his name, Alvarez Cabeza de Vaca. And he spent 8 years traveling to the southern, what is today the southern United States to Mexico. Out of 300 companions, only 4 survived. But he left behind an excellent record of what he saw, because the king, the emperor to whom he addressed himself, Charles V, was an avid falconer and avid hunter. And he was very interested in wildlife. So we have a very, very, very good idea what the wildlife was like on this continent in 1527 to 1536. And I can tell you the following: the continent was overpopulated by people and wildlife was very rare. In fact, Cabeza de Vaca never saw a coyote or a wolf. He never saw a grizzly bear. He knew of black bears, he knew of pumas as such. And I've written a paper on that, and I'll gladly send it to you if you contact me. Now, you asked whether we should spread our effort. The best thing that we can do is to maintain what we had in the past, namely a trophy hunting situation for grizzly bears. And pardon me if I deviate just a little bit, because this is another important point. The way to keep grizzly bears away from human beings is to have inefficient hunting. And the reason is you're taking advantage of a natural system. Grizzly bears and wolves as such, but grizzly bears and black bears and so on, do prey on one another. They're cannibals. And the bear is designed by nature to be very, very frightened of anything that resembles stalking, for instance. Yeah. So you can take advantage of that. And I know what it was like in Wellsgrave Park in the 1950s and 60s when I was there as a young biologist. We had grizzly bears. You never saw them. You had a few wolves. You never saw them because everybody carried a firearm in those days. And there was no hunting of grizzly bears. Everybody shot a moose. That's what you ate. And the other people that were there were guides and outfitters. There were also prospectors. They all carried a firearm. One thing that was not present was hikers. It's almost unbelievable today, is it? That you can have a landscape without hikers. But we didn't have that in the 1950s, 60s. I still remember the first one that I saw just before I left Wellsgrave Park was a teacher from Vancouver who had worked in Clearwater in previous times. And he was so unique because there he was as a hiker. But under those circumstances, then in Wellsgrave Park, we had extremely well-educated grizzly bears, and you had the freedom of the woods. You can do anything. You were safe and secure. You're not safe and secure in a national park because they are photographers and hikers and so on teach the animals that humans are frightened of grizzly bears. So again, you go to the scientific literature. Where is the #1 and #2 spot for killing grizzly bears in North America? It's Lake Louise and Banff.
Thank you.
Jared?
Yes, good to meet you,
good.
Doctor.
Good to meet you too.
So my question to you is, how much of a role does the gestation period of wolves and coyotes play into this? Earlier, you had mentioned I can't recall the exact number, but hypothetically, let's say one wolf consumes 20 or 25
22.
elk. Okay. Now, the gestation period of a wolf or coyote is roughly 1/3 of an ungulate, maybe
Sure.
even less than that.
That's right.
Now, is that a multiplier? I mean, by the time they can produce and broaden their territory, would they not encroach on more wildlife than just those 22 that were mentioned?
Well, the point about speaking about a wildlife desert or a predator pit is wildlife is virtually gone.
Yeah,
On the upside for the trophy hunter is what little is left
that's right.
has, of course, a tremendous amount of food and grows very large horns and antlers. So that's one of the things, the predator pit. But no, wolves have reproduced only once. Dogs, of course, reproduce repeatedly. And it's entirely thinkable that as hybridization increases, that you have a greater reproduction coming out as well. And also you should know the following. Your North American system of wildlife conservation, which is very unique, cannot survive with the idea that predators have free range. The amount of, we do know what happened in Yellowstone. We know what happened in Banff
That's right.
National Park. We know what happened in Idaho. Yeah. Now in Idaho, there's a reversal going on, God thanks. The only way that you are going to survive with your system, North American system of wildlife conservation, if you have very good, intelligent predator control. It's necessary. If the United States had wolves, your system of wildlife conservation would never have developed.
Fair enough. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Jake?
Jake,
Hello.
Hello.
With the large number of mountain lions on Vancouver Island,
Oh my God, yes, you've hit a sore point with me.
does that keep the wolf population in check? Like
No.
your example of, weren't you saying though, like in India that with the large amount of tigers, that keeps the wolf population down?
Yeah, the point is when a cougar meets a wolf,
Yeah.
the cougar is able to take down the wolf, but is not able to handle the pack. And we do have some very interesting examples of cougars taking down individual wolves. And by the way, I should have mentioned, we have in New Mexico, for instance, an absolute predator pit generated by cougars. Tremendous destruction of deer, and the deer population is being driven even further down into the ground because the cougars are preying now on the calves of domestic cattle. And this is what you get from protecting a predator mindlessly.
Mhm. Interesting. All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Darrell?
Good evening, Dr. Geist. Thank you for being here, and it's much appreciated. A couple of questions. First
Yes,
off,
please.
is the coy wolf or the wolf dog,
Yes.
are they more dangerous than a purebred wolf, which I don't believe exists anymore? And can you give us a quick synopsis of the diseases and the impacts economically that has on our environment?
Oh, that's quite a task. Well, first of all, in the eastern United States and Canada, of course, the wolves have been heavily hybridized already with coyotes and their coy wolves. I'm aware of only one fatality at the present time, which was in Cape Breton. A young lady was killed by coy wolves. You may remember that. But that's the only one that I remember at the present time. Let me put it this way. As long as you have wolves that are reasonably pure, and as long as you have pressure on them, they're very shy. They're not dangerous. It's when you have this nonsense of not controlling them, when they're free to learn that you don't do anything. This is why Kenton Carnegie died. And also why other people in Saskatchewan were attacked. Surreptitiously now, of course, wolves are being controlled. No two ways about it. But the idea of a free-for-all for wolves on the continent is a very, very bad idea indeed. Now you had the second question again. Let's refresh it, please.
Can you tell us the economic impact or of the diseases? And
Oh yeah, diseases.
yes.
Yeah. Well, all I can tell you is that when I was a graduate student, an undergraduate student, hydatid disease in British Columbia was something that was feared. And we had a professor, Professor Adams, at the University of British Columbia, who had a very good relationship with the General Hospital, Vancouver General Hospital, and he produced the most amazing slides, which to this day I will retch when I even think about them. They're horrible slides because the hydatid disease shows you the cysts that occupy the lung or the liver of the individual involved. And the reason why they were so common was that in those days, trappers fed the offal from their moose or elk or caribou to their sled dogs. And the sled dogs became infected. And they then the trappers handling the harnesses, for instance, soiled with dog feces and so on, got infected. And one of the good things about the Ski-Doo and the snowmobile is that this disease has virtually disappeared. So that is a good thing. The only other thing that wolves do get into is, of course, rabies. And rabid wolves are something horrendous, absolutely horrendous. But that is sporadic and will only occur, and is only really dangerous in the broader sense is if wolves are common and if you are not able to kill the wolf. So that we have this problem with rabid wolves occurring, let's say, in Russia at the present time. But it takes quite some time before that wolf gets killed because people don't carry firearms. We don't have the right to carry arms like we do have here in North America or in Canada, God thanks. Yeah. So rabid wolves disappear in British Columbia very, very, very quickly. So we don't have too much to worry about that. And by the way, if you find an elk with cysts in their lungs and so on, you can eat the meat. There's no problem.
Okay.
The meat is fine.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor.
You're welcome.
Andrew.
Oh, yes. Here we go. Andrew.
Hello, Dr. Geist.
Hello,
Yeah,
Andrew.
yeah, I've been a fan of yours for a couple of years now since I've found some of your discussions online. So it's a pleasure. My question is, and it came up recently with me trying to figure out how to actually contribute to wolf hunting. I'm a new hunter and I hunt ungulates, but do the balanced approach more from an ethical standpoint. So there were a few people talking about hunters and if they do have a significant impact on reducing wolf populations. And the example given was if you kill one or two wolves, this can lead to a hierarchy battle and potential division of the wolf pack and a net gain in wolves. So what is your opinion on that?
That's right. Well, first of all, you're stating quite correctly that if the wolf pack is disrupted, it's disrupted. But what it simply means is that the wolf in disrupted stage will continue hunting. It will continue to search for places for other packs to join, and that can happen. And as far as I'm concerned, I wouldn't worry greatly about that. If you have a high population of wolves, by all means, go hunt and take them down. And you, as indicated, you don't have to go very far before you have a real positive result in the sense that you get your wildlife back again. Good luck to you.
Excellent, thank you. Moderator, do I have time for one quick follow-up question?
Yes, you do.
Okay, my second question was, again, just reading and researching, with the closure of the grizzly bear hunt, there's, I'm guessing, but I'm going to guess that there's been an expansion of the grizzly bear populations here. That compounded with, high wolf populations, is the theory of sow grizzlies with cubs being pushed closer and closer to urban areas. Does that hold weight?
Correct.
Is it causing more bear-human conflicts?
No, that is correct. That has been already reported in the scientific literature. This has been observed and reported. So you're on the right track. Yes, grizzly bear females will avoid males one of my colleagues in Alaska reports rather humorously that grizzly bear females would leave their cubs with fishermen fishing for salmon along the shore, and then would come back and retrieve them again. So that's true, it's valid. And by the way, right now, already if you have a surplus of grizzly bears, the young males get pushed out. So we see them crossing, hopping between islands to Vancouver Island right now. Well, that didn't used to be the case. There used to be no grizzly bears here, which means that the native people were taking care of grizzly bears quite nicely. Yes, they were very respectful, I know that. And they divided the countryside between, the creeks, those which were available to grizzly bears and those which they harvested from. But the number of grizzlies were low. That's the reason why the grizzly bears never came back to the island. Now they are coming to the island. And that
Excellent.
means that your unique black bear, and the black bear on Vancouver Island is genetically very unique.
Yeah, it's
Quite
large.
different. Well, it's quite a different animal from the black bear on the mainland. Yeah, if the grizzly bears take over, they might go extinct. Who knows? I hope not.
Jake,
Martin?
Hello, Dr. Geis. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you, SCI, for the presentation. I'm a big fan of your work, Dr. Geis, specifically around the North American model and the work you did with mule deer ecology. My question to you, Dr. Geis, is there is a lot of scientific literature that states that wolves, this is kind of building off of the last question,
Sure.
wolves quickly recolonize areas when they're shot at. Like we look at caribou recovery in British Columbia and how much and how quickly wolves return to an area after they've several packs have been removed.
Yeah.
And other studies in Alaska and in Idaho just showing how difficult it is for people to manage predators without, you know, a large scale poisoning campaign. So my question is, how can we leverage the hunting community and the non-hunting community and cite science-based management when a lot of the literature does not necessarily say that hammering wolves is going to reduce their populations?
Well, all I can tell you is go back to history in case of doubt. People have been associated with wolves for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And the only thing that works is a trapping program that reduces the wolf populations to a very, very low level. And then you have wolves that behave and you can live with them. So in other words, I wouldn't worry greatly about science in this case. Go to history and you will see just how much wolves have affected us in the past.
Agreed. Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Geis.
You're welcome. Jake, you have another question?
Yeah, I do. Is it possible to reverse these predator pits by harvesting these grizzly bears that are taking over?
Yes, correct. Simple question, simple answer.
Yeah, excellent, thank you.
give me a minute. I got
any-
a little bit behind. Julie, I'm bringing
Okay.
you on.
Who's on?
Julie.
Where do I
Hello.
click? Oh, yes.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. I wrote out some of my questions and I'm not sure if I can ask them without reading my questions. So I'm not sure. if
Read
I'll
them by
get-
all means. It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, I basically am coming at this from an environmental perspective is what my experience or my reading has been. Like, I'm really disturbed about some things that have happened on Vancouver Island, for example, the killing of Takea and,
Okay.
you know,
Yeah.
anyway, I just want to finish. So you say that, oh, the environmental perspective is wrong, but I don't see a balanced depiction of it here on this conversation. Like, is this conversation only about wolf predation?
Now, wait, I better let you know the following. My dear friend, Tom Bergerud, who died recently, made a very important point. He said, if you introduce wolf control, and if you allow the prey population to recover, you will in the long run have far more wolves than if you let simply, quotation mark, nature take over, and you have the predator pit situation. Because in the predator pit situation, wolves are rare, but they are reasonably abundant where there is abundant wildlife, and you can have that. In other words, what we have to do is we have to manage in this regard. Look, I observed wolves for 2 years running, every 2 weeks. They came through and I had them in front of me in my cabin. And I was able to observe that, yeah. You couldn't observe that under predator pit situation. You could only observe that where there was wildlife was abundant, where these wolves were in fact controlled. But wolf control doesn't mean that you have destroyed packs, not at all. I had intact packs and they came through, and it was, as I said, every 2 weeks, I had the pleasure of seeing them for several days.
Mhm. I was just really disturbed when I saw that there was a hunter who had taken down 2 wolves, and then she was saying that she was going to finish hunting down the whole pack. She was going to, you know, like go in there and get rid of every single one that she could find.
Well, if this wolf pack is in settled landscapes, I'm with her, because that's exactly what I experienced here. And that is why I'm telling you, 350 yards from where I'm talking right now, my neighbor was attacked by 5 wolves. My neighbor and his wife, in fact, were attacked by 5 wolves. And that wasn't the only attack. They attacked the second time as well. And that is not acceptable. Wolves belong into the wilderness, and we had that in the past, and we had thriving wolf populations at a relatively low level, mind you, but they were doing very well, and we didn't have the threat of hybridization. This was an ideal situation. Wolves reproduce very, very quickly and very severely, but in settled landscapes, they have no place.
Yeah, I hear that. I have just read, though, that if you don't have wolves, you have an overabundance of ungulates, and the ungulates take over the eating of all of the you know, the trees and the grass, and pretty
Well, as a
soon
matter of fact,
you don't have like smaller animals. You have
no,
the
no,
river,
no, no, not
you have
quite,
the
not quite true.
streams, you have the streams becoming depleted. If
Yeah.
you return the wolves and you have a controlled population of ungulates, then the trees can start to grow back, the beavers can return,
But you see,
all
this
of that, the balance.
Julie, this comes out of England, straight out of the propaganda machine of our opponents in this case. This is rubbish.
I
I'm
know,
sorry
but the
to say.
thing is, you say that's propaganda machine.
Yes, it is
What
propaganda.
you're saying may be very well be propaganda machine as well.
Well, all I can tell you is you can check me on me out. You need a library card for
That's-
that.
Yeah, that's why I was saying, why isn't there both perspectives being presented here at this talk? It's totally slanted on the one side of wolf predation. I can't hear you.
Julie, we're going to move on. We've got quite a number of speakers
Yeah,
still,
Fine,
and
yeah, fine.
thank you for participating.
Yeah.
Okay, so next we are going to move to Jake. Jake, are you here still, or did we answer your question? I've lost track.
Yeah, my questions have been answered.
Perfect. How about,
And it shows that the doctor's been muted.
oh, there we go. I will signal him to unmute. I think I was pushing buttons there. Okay,
Okay,
there we go.
unmute.
There we go. Joel, have I got you here?
Yes, ma'am, you do.
Excellent. Hi, Joel.
Oh, yes. Okay. Here. Yes, I have seen.
Hi, how are you doing, Doctor?
Fine, thank you.
I'm an undergrad, a biology undergrad at Concordia University in Montreal, and
Oh,
what
it's
I wanted to say
wonderful.
was what you're saying. Do you know anybody there in the faculty?
Well, I've been retired 25 years on the West Coast, and Montreal is a long ways away. However, my grandchildren, great-grandchildren are in Montreal.
Oh, it's
And they're
fantastic.
Quebecois. They're Quebecois.
What I wanted to ask was, if anybody's familiar with Lotka-Volterra models and the sine curves of predator-prey interaction, what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And I've played with simulations like Populous that you can actually input predator and prey numbers and see what happens. So I know what you're saying is right. But before humans were as influential as we were, back when those mega predators like the big cats and stuff were here, were there still as many predator pits because of their predation? Maybe the wolves were in check, but your tigers, your big animals like that.
It's a lovely question that you asked. Like? Yeah, Joel, that's a lovely question that you asked. It's bothering. It's something that I've been thinking about myself. The evidence that we have from the days before humans came to North America, and now you can judge for yourself, is that prey evolved into very high performance runners. Now you cannot have a pronghorn antelope that is a high performance runner or a bison that is geared for high speed running if you have an obstructed landscape. It can only happen if you have wide open spaces, which suggests that this large number of herbivores, there were over 60 species, these large number of herbivores kept the vegetation down very much. You can, yeah, good, you can still hear me. And in addition to that, it generated a very toxic vegetation. So when you look at the North American system, where there are tremendous number of herbivores impinging on the vegetation, the most toxic tree in the world is the manchineel tree, which you still find in Florida, for instance, yeah? Yeah, it's an endangered tree, and whenever they find one, they put a fence around it so you don't get even close to it. It's so dangerous. If you stand underneath it in the rain, you'll regret it. It's so toxic as such, yeah. So the other thing is these iron-wooded trees that we have in North America as a consequence of ground slows and mammoths and so on, bending them and so on and so forth. So yes, we had a great influence by the herbivores on the vegetation. And one important lesson to be learned is if we do not have the herbivores on the vegetation, what do you think happens with fires? You see, when herbivores were exterminated by people on this continent about 12,000 years ago, the next thing that you find in the soil is large amounts of charcoal because you had conflagrations going through the landscape. And native people in the next 10,000 years, 12,000 years, learned very, very well how to control those fires. They manipulated the landscape, of course, with fire, and they made it in such a fashion that the landscape ultimately served human needs. So that, for instance, the Eastern hardwood forest was a man-made nut garden. That's what it was in the past, you see. So yes, if you have what you had in North America, it was a highly developed fauna and flora interacting, and the flora responded with great toxicity, great spicules, great toughness, and so on and so forth. It means that it was really being hammered without, but there were no forest fires. And you can find that in the soil. You don't find the carbon deposits in the soil.
Thank you for the answer, Doctor. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Wendy.
Hello.
Where is Wendy?
I'm right here.
Oh, there we are. Sorry,
I don't know where my video went.
Oh, too bad. Well, I can hear you, Wendy.
More of a question. Wondering if you had any information, there we go, on Dr. John Elliott, who used to be the biologist up in Region 7 and his wolf studies, if that was available or not.
Mine is, well, as I said, I know of him, of course, and I've met him in years gone by, but he did a very good wolf study, and I have heard about it. I haven't seen it personally. So I wish I could help you there, but I can't. It must
I
be
don't
there
know if
somewhere.
I don't know if he ever published anything, but what stuck in my brain was when you said a wolf eats 22 ungulates.
Yeah, but that's from Yellowstone Park. That's
Yeah,
available.
Dr. John always said they ate 26 in the north.
No, that's pretty close, isn't it?
Pretty close, yeah, pretty
Yeah,
much.
that's
the
pretty
same.
close.
But thank you very much, Dr. Geist. I really enjoyed what you're saying. It's
Thank you.
very informative. Thank you.
Rick Taylor.
Okay, now let's see where there's Rick here on my. Oh, here we go, Rick Taylor. Hello. Oops, it doesn't come up.
Oh, okay, Dr. Geist.
Now I hope I can see you.
No,
If
I
I
hope you can't. I'm just laying on the couch here. I didn't even have a I didn't even have a question for
the
you.
image doesn't come up, but don't worry. You can ask the question. I can hear you.
Good. Doc, I just want to thank you for what you're doing for our club. And as ever, you're a fabulous storyteller. I was one of your students in the 60s back in Calgary.
Oh, really?
And oh, sure. Oh, sure. Right. Actually, I didn't do what you wanted. You said, who's going to make the biggest contribution to wildlife biology? And we're all waving our hands. And you said, who's going into government? Very, very prescient result there. If you don't have the right people in power, we don't get the right decisions.
That is absolutely correct.
Anyways, Doc, all the best. Thanks a lot for doing this. Over and out.
Thank you.
No,
you are. Okay.
I think I have Terry next. Terry, did I get you online yet? If not, Brenda.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello,
Brenda Nelson.
Dr. Weiss. I'm not Brenda. I'm Brenda's husband. Anyways, I was fortunate enough to be in the Spatsizi just after you were. I went in there in 1967 when the
Oh, my
caribou,
goodness.
you could still see a mountain of horns come over the ridge.
Yes.
And we watched
That
them
was a fantastic
decline.
country.
Yeah, it was something then. It was something to see, and it's something to regret to see what it is now. But
Correct.
over the years, with the caribou, the government has studied them. We had biologists, good biologists, ones you'd know, but for 25 years, they've studied them to death pretty well, and nothing is done. They're collaring them. 2 weeks ago, they were up collaring some more and looking at them, but nothing is done when they know it's predation. I mean,
That's correct. And
caribou is a food animal. Yeah, you know, caribou is a
well, all I can say is, what are
food
we
animal,
frightened of?
and we'll see them. Pardon me?
I say, what are we frightened of?
Yeah,
Wolves
I
will
just,
thrive. Wolves will thrive under proper wolf control.
but we
I mean,
have
that's-
no wolf control. I mean,
I
all
know
we've
that's
done
the
is-
reason they are not thriving. Well, that's the reason why we are suffering at the present time. But we can have
Yeah.
the best of both worlds, for heaven's sake. We
we
can have
we've
wolves
studied
and we
them.
can have abundant wildlife, and we had it in the Spatsizi when you saw it at its best.
Exactly. You're 100% right. And you know, we've studied them to death pretty well at caribou now. The amount of caribou in the Spatsizi today is, when you were there, I was there. How do we go about getting the government to wake up and realize what the problem is so we can bring those caribou back?
Well, the government is woken up. The cabinet is familiar with this, but they don't dare act because they are so afraid for their seats. They are afraid of losing elections because of the rather virulent, the animals' rights movements and so on. And I mean, this comes, what I'm saying telling you right now comes directly out of cabinet. I know about that. I know cabinet ministers. And one reason we only have very, very insufficient wildlife management is because we cannot, as scientists, operate under these conditions. Sorry, we have a political problem here.
Yeah, it is a problem when government, for their own benefits, sacrifice our wildlife.
Well, listen, The other thing is, I hope that Native people would realize that with the policies the government has in place now, they're not going to be very much hunting. And I'm thinking back, hunters become hunters by virtue of starting early. I started early, and I was able to produce wildlife for the kitchen, and my grandmother was thrilled by that, believe you me, and my mother as well. But when you don't have any wildlife, when you have an overabundance of wolves, it's not just simply the big game that vanishes, it's the small game that vanishes as well. I know that, it's happened right here. Gone, yeah. And when there is nothing to hunt, when children can no longer become hunters, what do they do? Sniff gasoline and commit suicide?
That's basically what it's coming to.
So in other
Thank you
words,
very
it's a good thing to have wildlife in abundance and being able to make use of it.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Good.
What's that?
We are
Yes.
getting down to some shorter numbers here. So next up, Travis, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Oh, there we go. Yes, Travis.
Thank you for being here, Dr. Geist. I
welcome.
actually have two questions for you.
Please do.
So the first question would be, with the introduction of wolves to Isle Royal in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, should we be concerned with the moose and lynx populations there, and also the wolf populations, because there are no native bears there, black or grizzly, that the Isle will become basically a predator pit and then a complete desert? And the second,
Isle Royal has been occupied by wolves and ups and downs and has been studied very closely. And that's a good thing. I'm all in favor of using national parks as experimental areas. I'm quite happy with the introduction of wolves into Yellowstone Park so that we can learn. And that's the important part. We need to study. We need to go out and see what is happening. Yes, I'm aware that Isle Royal has been repopulated again by the Parks branch with wolves. We'll see what happens.
Okay, do I have time for a second question?
Please do.
The second question would be, is Alaska kind of a different thing that doesn't really fall into your theory, only because wolves are still populating 90% of their native territory, yet there's still massive amount of prey there, hence why so many hunters go there every year to hunt. It doesn't seem like the wolves have taken their toll on the prey populations there.
Well, what I was so astonished to find out in Alaska was the following. Alaska is practicing predator control in areas that they designate for that purpose, and this is where you have the abundance of wildlife. They have other areas which are predator pits, and they leave them alone till these areas are required for wildlife production. And this is why I've said they have I have to look at it every so often, low density dynamic equilibrium. It's in the literature and it's very, very well done. So Alaska is a bright spot. They're aware of the predator pit situation, they understand it, and they know how to handle it, in the sense that the areas which are today predator pits will become areas for wildlife, where predators will be controlled if the wildlife is required for human use.
Okay, thank you very much.
They're doing a good job in Alaska.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you for your time.
How about Ray? Are you around, Ray? It looks like Ray is still around, but we're not too sure if he's able to.
Ray Collingwood?
Yes.
I'm clicking on his square, but we don't get any response.
That's okay. You know what, Ray, we will come back to you. What I want to know, Andrew and Nathan, you two have lots of questions still. Did you get all of your questions answered in this, or do you want to chime in again?
Andrew, myself, no, all my questions have been answered. Thank you.
Great.
Oh, Collingwood.
And
Ray
Nathan,
Collingwood.
how about you? Nathan Thomas? I don't think we actually got you on here, did we yet, Nathan? Let me just check and see if I've got him added.
Nathan
He
Thomas.
might be gone. Okay, so Val, I'm going to just run over a couple of questions from Nathan. Nathan would like to know, is it okay if he talks on social media about the information that you've given us?
By all means.
Okay. Second question from Nathan is, would you allow, or is there a way for us to get your hard books into audio or YouTube so that people can hear these books that are not?
Well, this is a very interesting suggestion, because I'm really wondering, see, I have no difficulties publishing in Europe. I have difficulties publishing in North America.
Okay.
And would be very good if you as SCI would open up the possibilities of being able to publish it. I'll give you another example. I wrote a book on mountain goats. I've studied mountain goats. When I wrote my book on mountain sheep, I got Book of the Year award, but I also studied mountain goats, and I postponed that. And just as I finished the book on mountain goats, the club reneged on it. So I'm sitting here, and I'm sitting right now and watching something that I'm very unhappy about, that the mountain goat is being treated in Colorado and in Wyoming as an invasive species. Well, the mountain goat is a native species. It used to be found all the way from Alaska to Mexico, but it was exterminated in the southern parts of the continent during megafaunal extinction about 12, 13,000 years ago. So it is native. It's only making a comeback. And now it's being treated as an invasive species. It shouldn't be. And the joke of the matter is the following. If you have heavy wolf predation on elk, and the elk populations decline, mountain goat populations expand. And the reason is a very simple one. Mountain goats are dependent almost entirely on the first 100 yards of grassy slope below the cliffs. They need that. If you have a big elk population or a big bighorn sheep population, that food is being taken by elk and by sheep, and the mountain goats go empty. So the net result is that when there are a lot of elk and bighorn sheep, there are few mountain goats. But if you have very few elk and very few bighorn sheep, there's lots of mountain goats. And that's exactly what you had at about the time of the First World War here in British Columbia. In British Columbia, the most abundant big game animal, save the black bear possibly, was the mountain goat around 1914, 1915. And the reason was elk were almost extinct and bighorns were very much extinct. So there's this peculiar balance that takes place. I know about it because I've studied it. And my colleagues in the United States obviously do not. So it's a good idea if we can discuss how we can get some of these material and how you can access the books that I've shown you here, for instance, because they're available in Europe.
Val, you can bet that we will be in touch with you after this to discuss those
let's
very
do that.
topics.
Thank you.
Yep, excellent. Okay.
I am still here, by the way.
Nathan?
Nathan? Oh, yay. Okay,
Yes.
Nathan, you chime in with your questions.
All right, so thank you for asking that question for me. I know I asked quite a few questions, but thank you for answering that, Doctor, and thanks, moderator, for reading that out. I do have two more questions for the doctor.
Please.
You talked about the effects of ending the wolf hunt in Saskatchewan and the outcome of that.
Yes.
I know ending the grizzly bear hunt in British Columbia is a fairly recent thing, and I know you already talked on that about grizzly bear sows and their interaction with humans since the ending of the hunt. But I'm asking this question again, but more related directly to the predator pits. And have we seen any effect of ending the grizzly bear hunt here or anywhere else in regards to the grizzly bears remaining to stay in those predator pits for extended unnatural periods of, have we seen those effects yet?
Well, all I can tell you is that we have here and in Siberia and in Alaska vast areas where we have what I have just described. Very virtual lack of wolves, grizzly bears, and a predator pit situation maintained by grizzly bears, period. Now, the Alaskans have also published that their attempts to reduce grizzly bear populations by hunting have been met by not very great success. So that's all I can tell you at the present time. What really, really bothers me is the following. When I was a young zoologist, my first job was in Wells Gray Provincial Park in 1959 to 1960. And I was on very good terms with, of course, Ralph Ritchie and the biologists there. And we had a moose heaven in those days. I shot a bull moose, one of the very best ever taken out of Wells Gray Park, on the 23rd of December, 1958. And I was on a cornice in the morning of the 23rd, looking down on a slope, and my friend and colleague Michael Steinle, who became the head of the Bavarian Forest Service, was 1.5 miles away with a spotting scope, and he was looking over that slope. I killed the big bull moose. On that slope were 36 moose, of which 14 were bulls. Now you cannot imagine seeing something like that today, anywhere. When I became my first job as a biologist was in Wells Gray Park, I was quite amazed to find that we had a virtually unhunted grizzly bear population completely dominated by big males. You didn't see them. You found their double track trails. You knew they were there. At night time, they would jingle the barbed wire around cabins and so on and so forth. And the point was that nobody was killing them. Everybody who hunted was hunting moose. That's what was taken. Grizzly bears were, why would you want to shoot a grizzly bear? You couldn't eat the damn thing anyway. That was the attitude then. The only grizzly that was killed that I know of was killed by Faye Hartman for the museum in Victoria. And that was the only one. I wanted to get one, but I didn't, because they were virtually invisible at that time point. So I'm really wondering if a preponderance of large grizzly bear males leads to a severe depletion of the bear population by predation. Because the Alaska boys, in instrumenting these grizzly bears with cameras, also recorded how that the biggest male that they instrumented within 30 days killed a female grizzly and ate her. Now, these are bits and pieces of information. What we need is much more detailed studies, and I hope we will do these, and certainly do some of these beautiful modern, apply some of the modern techniques like the Alaskans were doing. We need more information, clearly, on that. But the point is, we didn't fare badly at all in previous years when we had a trophy season for grizzly bears. We didn't fare badly. We're doing okay.
Thank you so much. Do I have time for one more quick question?
Oh, go ahead.
So it seems like, in summary, from what you're saying, is humans are very much a part of the natural balance of wildlife in the last 12. You mentioned, 12,000 years in North America.
Oh, absolutely.
It seems like what you're telling us is, for us to even try and give wildlife a chance, or for us to even do wildlife justice in this province, we literally need humans to interact with wildlife.
Correct. That's correct. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. In other words, you have to take the place of the natural predators that affected wolves in the past before we became dominant here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, Robin, if you can unmute your video and stuff like that, then we'll bring you up next with Dean for his question.
This is me, but I got much uglier.
I'm sorry, I'm getting uglier by the day. I'm getting old.
Thanks very much for, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can see you as well.
Oh, perfect. Well, sorry for that, but
no, not at all. Sorry.
Thanks.
It's okay.
Thanks very much for everything you've done tonight and everything you've done in your entire life with wildlife. Appreciate
welcome,
all of
Robert.
it. My question, the other guy touched on it here, just my predecessor. With the human interaction, it seems lost just sitting on the outside looking in on both the from an anti standpoint and hunters and pro whatever
Yes,
your angle
yes.
is in wildlife, that people seem to be losing the fact of our human influence and the constant changing dynamic that we play and our responsibility that we have to evolve with it and make the adjustments based on the fact that we are the ones controlling the changes and wrecking the dynamic that used to exist pre 12,000 years ago.
Right.
Based on the your other statement, Doctor, that with the MLAs feeling the pressure and et cetera for their seats and whatnot, I tried to put a module together a couple of years ago, and then I lost interest and for whatever other reasons, on basically the money and responsibility that falls on us as wildlife managers. And I'm sure you felt the pressure as well, not being able to do your job or doing your job and then not getting the results you wanted because you couldn't get funding and et cetera to help you implement the things that you saw that needed to be done. Do you have a solution? I wanted to put something forth that took the money out of the government's hand, that put it at a biologist level, regional to regional, so that they got the money, and then MLAs could not therefore be lobbied by private sectors for those funds.
Well,
all I can thought into that?
Well, all I can tell you, Robin, this is new to me, but if you can succeed, all the power to you.
I was hoping for more than that.
All the power to you.
All right, very well.
One of the things that I wish we had more chance to do is to talk sensibly to the opposition. That's very, very difficult because they are religiously convinced of the righteousness of their act. And when you are when you practice a religion, reason has no place and evidence has no place. So how do we do it?
I get that part. It would be nice though if we could alleviate them from a position where they have to answer those questions, where they can't be leveraged.
Yeah. Well, I would think, Robin, that we will have to approach more closely our native communities here, because they will be suffering from what is going on. In other words, when they cast their lot with the environmentalists, instead of casting their lot with the history of their own people, yeah, then they themselves will be suffering. And if we don't have anything to hunt, look, what a really ridiculous situation we're into. British Columbia is exactly twice as large as Sweden. And Sweden harvests today, after a great reduction in their moose harvest, around 80,000 moose a year. And how many do we harvest? 5,000? 3,000?
Is there information on that we can take from that?
Well, I think you do. Go into Europe and see what is happening there, yeah? Moose management, I mean, wildlife management can be done for abundance. And we used to have that accidentally by virtue of the fact that we had trappers out in the countryside, which were controlling wolves and controlling grizzly bears, of course, as well, because grizzly bears do a very good job in ripping down caches. And trappers were not very happy with that, I can assure you that. So, as I said, you have to go back to recent history to discover that as long as we had trappers in the countryside, as long as we had a trade in furs, we had an abundance of wildlife. The first time I went deer hunting, pardon me, the first time I went whitetail deer hunting in Saskatchewan, on the first day I missed 8 big bucks because I had overtaught myself to lead too far ahead. Never mind, next day I killed a 5-pointer, so I was all right on that, but it just shows you the abundance of wildlife we expected at that time.
Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Jeremy Osborne, are you still around?
Pardon me?
I'm looking for Jeremy Osborne.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Excellent.
Yes, there is Jeremy. I can see it down below here.
Sorry, you can.
I cannot see. Oh, maybe.
There we go.
Yes, here we go. Hello, Jeremy.
Hey, I just want to thank you for all your great work. I've really enjoyed listening to some of your interviews in the past. My question is about the large monoculture forestry that we're often seeing in the north these days. And I'm wondering what kind of effect do you think that has on large ungulate populations?
Well, it's quite clear that foresters don't like ungulates. We know that much at the present time. But at the same time, do we like forest fires? Do you like the conflagrations that we're having now on a regular basis?
Not to the scale we're getting.
Well, you see, one we didn't have them in the past. It was not only global warming that is associated with forest fires. It's also the overabundance of fuel which is being produced. And an overabundance of fuel is produced when you reduce your wildlife populations and also your grazing by cattle and sheep and so on and so forth. In other words, the wildlife is part and parcel of protecting the land from excessive fires. And in fact, if you go back to the history, before 12,000 years, there were virtually no fires because we know that from the charcoal deposition in the soils. The real conflagrations began after native people eliminated the megafauna, which was about 12,000 years ago. Then you have big charcoal deposits, which tell you that huge conflagrations went through the land. So wildlife can be an important part in controlling forest fires if used intelligently, in the sense that they remove fuel. I'm very well aware of the conflicts between forestry and wildlife, which is deeply settled in Europe, and I was familiar with that when I was already a young boy. You're right.
And could I ask you another follow-up question to that?
Please do.
Do you think that the decline of salmon over the past 100 years and the nutrients not coming upstream into every nook and cranny of the province is also part of it?
Well, yes, that's a very good question. I have been amazed at the size of spruce trees that grew where bears dragged out the salmon after they died in the, that has an effect, not the slightest doubt.
Okay.
Alexander, are you still around?
Could I maybe ask one more question if
sure.
anyone else wants to go then? What do you think we could do to change the way forestry works? That way we can still have people employed by it, but we can also try and do it in a better way for wildlife. Because I've heard that in Ontario, our forests don't look anything like this. You can walk through where they've logged and you can hardly tell.
Yeah, no, there is no question about the fact that foresters and wildlife managers can cooperate very nicely for mutual benefit. There's no question about that. We've done that in the past, and I think this should be part and parcel of an ongoing affair. And as I said, wildlife can help forestry. You don't have to, just look what happens when you exclude wildlife from a piece of land. In no time flat, it's just simply dense bush and nothing else, choking out everything, yeah? So wildlife has a place. And when we have intelligent management, it has people of managers of goodwill working together, there is no problem. It can be done.
Thank you.
Okay, we have Tom.
Alexander?
Give me a second, Tom. I'm going to just bring you up.
Hello, Alex.
All right.
I can't hear you yet. I can't hear you, Alex. I can see you.
Okay, so I'm going to give you an anonymous question, Val.
Okay,
In relation to grizzly bear populations
right.
after the end of hunting in BC,
Yes.
should our numbers not be declining since we were requested to target male bears which are known to kill cubs? I believe our wildlife management model is to harvest the surplus of animals and minimize population decline.
My answer to that is the following. I am very much in favor of highly, highly inefficient grizzly bear hunting. Because this highly inefficient hunting produces very few kills and produces a maximum of security for human beings. If you have very inefficient hunting for a long time, grizzly bears live splendidly, but you never, never see them. They don't interact with human beings. They stay away. I've experienced that. The only places where I've had, and my students have had trouble, is national parks. I have been treated by a grizzly bear. It's not much fun, I can tell you that. My students have been treated by grizzly bears, but only in national parks. In areas where there was hunting, not the slightest difficulties with grizzly bears as such. So, as you can see, I'm not really concerned about the ups and downs in the numbers as such, but I am concerned by the fact that if we exclude hunting, inefficient, especially inefficient hunting, we create insecurity for people. Because wherever you have the freedom of the woods, that's what I'm calling it, when you have significant hunting of predators, you can have picnics, you can hike, you can do anything. I've experienced that. Wolves and grizzly bears were no problems in my youth, ever. You could go anywhere, any place. The reason was they were being kept well behaved by the fact that people were out with guns, and people out with guns are arrogant. And grizzly bears know that very, very quickly. They're very smart and they're very sensitive. So hunters can contribute in a very real fashion to the well-being of our population when they want to go out and enjoy themselves in the countryside. But if you take that away, then you have coyotes hunting people in parks, and you have wolves that, like Kenton Carnegie was killed by, or you have the situation as in Banff National Park, where grizzly bears become tame, want to become acquainted with humans in their grizzly bear's way and get killed. That's Lake Louise and Banff National Park, and it's in the literature. You can read it up. You don't have to take my word for it.
Thank you. Alexander, I see you're with us.
He's still not with us. I still can't hear him.
Andrew, for some reason, hang on a second, I'm going to try again and see if we can get your volume up. You want to try now, Alexander?
Well, he's trying, and I can see him.
He's trying. Okay. So Alexander's got, so Alexander's got somebody. Alexander, we're going to come back to you. Tom, are you around?
Yeah, you bet.
Excellent. Yes. Why don't you chime in,
Hi, Tom?
Hey, Dr. Val, great to see you. Thank you for the presentation. You were part of a great symposium in Cranbrook, British Columbia a couple of years ago.
Oh, yes, it was some time ago.
Yeah, it was a great encounter. Hey, I want to bring a few things here together. I'm an MLA from Kootenay East, and I've heard a couple comments on us dastardly politicians.
No. You've got a tough job, I know that.
It is a tough job, but I've got a lot of great resources, and that's a lot of the resident hunters and a lot of the trappers and guide outfitters throughout the province, so I'm lucky that way. I've been working really hard on putting wildlife first in the province of British Columbia.
Thank you.
And, I've got four points that I'd like to point out, and the last one, maybe you can help me a little bit with. The first, you talked earlier about a hands-on management approach. I think that's really important to incorporate into our wildlife decisions.
Very much so.
Secondly, of it's super important that we have science and data collection and not so much social license that we're seeing.
Absolutely.
In our decision-making process. Third, I heard about funding. We need an independent funding model that is arm's length from government, that incorporates all license and tags and revenues brought in by the hunters, so that we can put those dollars directly into wildlife management, and also attract other forms of revenue, such as philanthropy, corporate donations, and those kind of things. And then fourth, the toughest one, of course, is legislation and putting wildlife first, so that other forms of industry, such as the Mines Act or the Forestry Act, I heard somebody talking about forestry, isn't superseding our priority for wildlife. So my question to you, Dr. Val, is have you seen in your encounters around the world any legislation that I can maybe perhaps copy or consider bringing that forward to the province of BC?
It's a very fair question, and I wish I could give you a fair answer to that, because in my retirement, I haven't been looking at legislation at all, unfortunately. But you're on the right track. That's the most important thing along this line. And for heaven's sake, what we have to get is much, much better discussion, I think, between Native people and ourselves along that line. They have so much to lose, so terribly much to lose, and we have so much to lose along this line. And there's another thing to also, is there any way that you can encourage your young biologists to go out and be in the countryside instead of behind the computer?
Absolutely.
I have such a hard time meeting people that have done what I have done. I'll give you a little example. If you want to see mountain goat females get rid of males after the rutting season, you have to be behind a spotting scope between Christmas and New Year's every year. And who is sitting behind a spotting scope at Christmas time and New Year? I've done it twice. I've been through 2 cycles. Yeah. So I've seen what mountain goat females do. And the big males leave quite nicely. The ones that don't want to leave are the 3- and 4-year-old stinkers. And that's the males, the females fight. And I've seen that too.
Right on. I'll keep plugging away, Dr. Val, and you do the same. It's always a pleasure to listen to you.
Tom, keep on going. You're a man of goodwill, and that's the most important thing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Alexander, we got you next.
It still doesn't come through. I don't know even if you can hear me. We have just the image, nothing else. Oh, something is happening.
Oh. No.
No.
Okay, I am going to
hang on, Alexander.
Alexander actually gave us a question. I'm going to read it. As
Okay,
many
please do.
folks who are watching this lecture know, your pilot project in Catamount was a huge success. How
Yeah.
did you manage wolves at that time?
Managing wolves in Alberta was never a big problem as far as I was concerned and knew about it. It may be, I realized that the spread of wolves has led to quite a few changes. But in my time period, there was no problem there. Our concern was to get that mine occupied, and the mine was being occupied not only by bighorn sheep, but very soon deer followed, then elk came. We had a great increase in the bird populations that settled on that mine. In other words, this became quite a little wildlife paradise, and that was the beauty about it. But there were also wolverine there, incidentally, grizzly bears were there. And it's okay for wolves to visit occasionally. It's not okay for them to sit there and kill everything out of sight. The same thing with the cougars. If you have too many cougars, you've got a problem. If you have a few cougars, you don't have any problem. If you don't have a few wolves, you don't have any problem. But if you have an overabundance of predators, too bad.
Thank you. Alexander, if you have a follow-up to that question, type it into our Q&A. Nathan, you are, I believe, unless we get Alexander's microphone working? Then Nathan, you're our last speaker.
Hi, Nathan.
Hi, Alex, you able to get your mic working?
He's not yet, Nathan.
Doesn't look like it. Okay, this is something that me and some other hunters have discussed around the campfire that isn't really, I haven't ever really heard anyone talk about. And I hunt parts of the province. I have the fortune of hunting both areas that have a lot of crown land ranching and a lot of areas that don't. And something that I've noticed, like in areas like in parts of Region 3 where there's a lot of free range cattle, hear a lot of talk from ranchers around the problems with wolves and other canine species being able to sustain themselves artificially thanks to an availability of food that would otherwise not normally be there. In other words, artificial sustenance that doesn't actually belong in the ecosystem. Now, I ask this question with no malice towards ranchers. I come from a ranching family. This is just a genuine question on, do we know the effects of ranching on public land that is accessible to predators that would otherwise not have this sustenance source to maintain their population?
Oh, all I can say is the following, that as long as you have ranchers managing the land for cattle, you're going to have a favorable situation for wildlife. Right now, where I'm sitting, 25 years ago was a wildlife paradise. It was not a ranch, it was a dairy farm. When the dairy farm was sold, the whole wildlife collapsed in almost unbelievable fashion. Right now, where I'm sitting here is a wildlife desert. 25 years ago, a superabundance of deer, of swans, of geese, of ducks, particularly grass-feeding ducks, everything vanished with the change in land use, from dairy in this case to basically hay production as such. So I find it difficult to generalize beyond the fact that if you have an active system maintaining cattle, it conditions the landscape in such a fashion that by and large, it is favorable for wildlife. All we are doing is you're following what used to be on this continent in ages gone by, when we have a tremendous abundance of different kinds of animals exploiting the ecosystem. So I don't know if that helps any. Maybe another time you and I sit down with a glass of beer and discuss it, and I'll get to find out more what's on your mind.
So it seems like then what you're telling me is what you've experienced is very similar to when trappers and dog sledders used to use the environment. They had no choice but to control certain species to a level that would allow them to be safe in that environment.
Correct.
What you've seen is with cattle ranchers using this environment and adjusting the environment to suit their purpose of maintaining their cattle so they can actually make a living is actually beneficial.
Yes, correct.
That is an opinion I have not heard yet. Thank you.
That is exactly what I'm finding. That's why I'm right now, my God, I'm having a wonderful relationship with ranchers in Texas.
Okay.
My goodness, we're producing magnificent wildlife on their land.
I quite like that. Thank you very much.
That's awesome. So Val, we have Dennis has raised his hand. Dennis, are you with us? Give him a minute to see if he pops up.
I hope he does.
Just gonna send him a couple of signals. Oh, he might be coming.
I'm there.
Excellent.
Okay, Dennis.
Hi, Dennis.
Hi.
I don't see your pictures, but I can hear you.
Just a second.
Don't worry, Dennis. As long as I can hear you, we can have a chat.
Okay. My comments is I hope that Julie that made the comments and is still on. it's just follow up of what you were saying about Alaska and Sweden, and I can add Quebec. All those places, the reason why they are managing predators, wolves and black bear and grizzly, it's the economic value. When we look at Sweden with 100,000 moose, between 80,000 and 100,000 moose that is harvested each year, if we put a value between $2,000 and $4,000, we're talking between 200 million to 400 million value, because if you take the 500 pounds at $4 to $10 a pound, you have a value. So when we look at grizzly, technically, when we take the data of the study in Alaska, where they have 34.4 moose and caribou killed during the calving season between—
I have the statistics here. You're right.
Between May 1st and June 15, we can evaluate that the value of a grizzly is negative about $50,000. So each grizzly cost to the society $50,000. So what's the element that was missing for the past, I would say 40, 50 years in BC, is making decision on economic value. When they've decided to say, okay, we want to increase the population of moose in an area, and like between Kelowna and Merritt, they put a fence all the way, then we don't have those accidents with the moose.
Correct.
In Quebec, in the past 25 years, they have quadrupled the number of moose that they are harvesting per year. And how they did that is that managing the forest, as you know, not to plant the same kind of tree all the way, pines and pines and pines.
That's
and
right.
also south of the St. Lawrence River, there's no wolves.
That's right.
And the success rate, when you have the chance to go in those areas of the park, is like 95, 99%
That's right.
success rate. So the point I just want to finish is I don't see how we can convince the people, that the government, when a lot of people from Vancouver and Victoria and don't see that aspect, because when they had the issue with the caribou, I was involved and I went a committee in Vancouver and we were invited.
Yes, yes.
And maybe you heard about that. And the guy from the government said in front of us, we didn't know how to manage the caribou and we're losing it. What are you suggesting?
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Yeah, we told them right away, as you know, just allow us to find a way that we can shoot the grizzly every second year or something like this. But it was just after that the government banned the hunting of the grizzly, so they couldn't reverse their decision that they just made. And it's the same government is in power presently. So I don't know how we can solve this issue.
Well, it's the irony behind it is that very close to Victoria are living two of the greatest caribou biologists of this world. Well, one of them died now, that's Tom Bergerud, yeah? Never consulted, never asked. And Tom Bergerud was very, very clear that the most important thing to return our caribou is to go and control predation. And he demonstrated that again and again. He's got a big book out recently and all his earlier work. And he made also this additional point that if you manage wolves and you have a high abundance of wildlife, you wind up with more wolves than you have if then you let it go and you have a predator pit situation. So your point is very, very well taken.
Yeah, I don't know how we're gonna find.
Well, the question is, how do we speak to an opposition that believes in their own righteousness?
Yeah, I just gonna finish a last comment on what
Please do.
exactly what you're saying. Like in other part of Canada and the US, you're allowed to bait for black bear, kill black bear, snare
Right.
black bear, and they know, like in Pennsylvania, it's over 20% they target every year to harvest black bear, and here in BC, it's less than 3%.
Yeah.
So we have that knowledge, we have that information, but the point that I just want to finish is the biologists that are in charge presently are the biologists in BC, I mean, that have been educated for the past, let's say 30 years or 40 years. And at that point, 40 years ago in BC, there was a big movement about nature and special kind of life
correct.
and all that.
Right.
So
I participated in that. You're right. You're right. Absolutely right.
So it's hard because it covers a lot of generations. So
But as I said, I was involved as the co-chairman of a panel that was looking for ecological reserves in the Yukon and the Western Arctic. And I was, of course, very closely involved with the Ecological Reserves Committee here in British Columbia. So yes, I'm guilty. I was one of those who promoted setting aside areas under protection. But I'm now saying that it's fine and dandy that we have these areas under protection. What we need now is to have sensible management so that we can manage for biodiversity, so we can manage for productivity and for beauty. Because
yeah,
protecting areas
and maybe the last point
gets
is
you into the wildlife deserts.
yeah, and then
The
maybe the
national
last
parks
point,
of the United States are noticing that now.
yeah, and maybe the last point is food protection. We just had this COVID that we see that we can be vulnerable. Can you imagine if almost like instead of 5,000 moose, we would get like I don't know, 50,000 moose? Then there will be more families that would have food for the whole year.
Correct. That's right. You're absolutely correct. In other words, what we are depriving our rural, particularly our rural families of, is the winter meat and a relief on their budget to some extent. In other words, we're generating an empty countryside with our environmental philosophy right now. A countryside void of virtually large animals and unproductive. And as I can say, how can native people stand that?
They are not hunters anymore.
No, you're very well, your points are very well taken, Dennis. Very well taken.
We'll talk another time. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you.
Bye.
Well, gang, a little bit of a slow start, and then we just sped right up and ran away with this. Val, that is the answer, or that is the end of the question and answer period.
Well, thank you.
Yes, we thank you very, very much. We'll be reaching out to you to discuss a few more things.
Yes, by all means. I'm available. As long as I live, we might be able to do something, but don't we?
Well,
Hi
that's
there.
excellent. Yep, there we go. Thank you again. Good night, everybody. Unless somebody chimes in quickly, we are good. We're done. I will have a recording of the webinar available. We'll do a little bit of an edit.
Yes, please
just to
do.
clean it up. Yep, a little bit there. And but we are good to go. So Val,
Well, thank
I will
you
let,
all around, Amberly, particularly for your patience and your perseverance and
no
your good
problem.
humor. All of that came in very, very handy. And you know why.
What's that? You betcha. You betcha.
Robin, thank you. And
I
we'll
will
be in
let,
touch on the email.
Al, I thank you so much for doing this, and I thank everybody who attended. I look forward to more amazing things to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can't wait to have a sit down.
Okay. Whoops.
Whoops.